Hi, JJ here from 22 Explosive Hits. First thing I want to clarify, I'm not a Sox fan. This is just a 1919 replica of the Chicago Black Sox hat that they wore. I collect memorabilia and stuff. Anyways, new segment I want to start on my channel. I'm going around interviewing people from the VC that I can connect with, and I'm calling getting to know people from the VC. I'm posting these interviews on my channel, help to promote them, help for me to get to know other people in the VC, being that I'm kind of new. So here's an interview that I did with Proghat, which is Ed, and going over how he started, what his music loves are, and everything else. Hope you enjoyed this interview, and I just want to remember to bring each other up rather than bring each other down. Have a great day. Oh, no problem. So tell me how'd you become to the VC? How, I know you've been around a while. How'd you come to the vinyl community?
Well, years ago, and I don't remember now, when I started getting back into buying records, um, I was buying records, and then one day I was working at work, and I'd like to listen to some of the music out there. People post like an album or something, and you can listen to it in the background. Well, then all of us, well, not all of a sudden, days would go by, and then I started seeing these little what do you want to call it, little windows on the side of the screen, and I saw people holding up records, and I was going, what's that about? Right? I kept seeing them. It was different people, and one guy that I kept seeing that interested me was a guy named, oh darn it, Lazarus. He's a big metal fan. So I clicked on his video, and he was just showing records, talking about them, new editions that he added to his collection. He was a big fan of metal. And I thought, wow, people really do watch these. They're really into it. And it's right, like I said, right at the time that I started getting back into vinyl. It started when a person that helped us buy this house that we lived in, he gave me records. And I didn't really have something to play them on, but I took them and I was like, oh, cool. And uh, as soon as I started seeing those videos, a lot of the people that were doing them didn't really say their name, so I don't remember only his. He would say his name, but then I just kept watching, and you know how the history will fill up. The more you watch, the more they suggest, and then all of a sudden, I was like, I'm going to do one. I'm going to do an introduction video to the VC, and I just kind of like watch somebody's video who did it, and I follow that format. Lo and behold, here I am.
So I noticed on your channel you're into jazz. It also says you're into the Who. Kind of what are your kind of musical background, or kind of what's your history with that?
My history with music, it all really begins with I like to watch a lot of cartoons, and at that time there were the Beatles cartoons, and I got to put it to you like this: I was just a kid. I didn't know much about the Beatles. It I didn't even know they were broken up, but they kept showing those cartoons, the younger Beatles, and
I have them
and
right over here.
yes, and I kept watching that, and I kept hearing classical music and cartoons, and so I like classical music. And then I started watching those Beatle cartoons, and my mom had certain records. She had a lot of R&B type records or soul music records, like Gladys Knight and the Pips, all the people on that label, International Philadelphia Soul, or I think it's called.
Right.
Right, and she had a bunch of those kind of records, and she was a big fan of Isaac Hayes. She told me she saw him in concert, and so I kept hearing her play records, and once in a while she'll play a Beatles record. But long story short, I kept watching those Beatle cartoons, and I was really digging the songs. And so I asked her one day on my birthday, I said, "Can you give me a Beatles record?" And she did. And when she brought it to the car, because she went inside and picked it for me, because back then, at least my parents were not like, you wait here and I'll go order you a hamburger. And it's not like we're kids, you're at a McDonald's and you see these little bitty kids and they go, what do you want? And they're like,
Yeah.
But anyway, she bought me out a Beatles album. She goes, "Happy birthday." And I pulled it out. And of course, I guess I've always been this way, like a point blank person. And I look at it, I said, "Mom, this is not the Beatles." She goes, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, it is. The Beatles don't have beards and wear glasses." And she was like, "You've been watching those cartoons. You have to understand, son. The Beatles broke up about 68, 69." I was like, "What?" It's kind of shattering. I was like, "You mean?" And so I was trying to process that. I'm like, "You mean they're not like they're not young?" She goes, "No, they've moved on and now have solo careers." And I was like, still perplexed about it. And I was thinking, okay, when I get home, I'm going to find out if this is a Beatles record. And the album was, I call it the Beatles Hey Jude Greatest Hits. It's the one, it's one of my favorite photos where they're standing in front of the door of a house. I think
Oh, the Abbey Road, or
it's the one where, let me pull it out real quick if you don't mind.
no problem.
Uh, it was this one. And I was like, "No, Mom, that's not the Beatles." She goes, "Yes, it is." I was like, "Okay." So I got it home. I opened it. It said the Beatles. I played it. And then, this album has a mixture of Paperback Writer, early, late 60s. And then, of course, has Hey Jude, Old Brown Shoe. And I was like, "Oh, okay. Now I get it." And in fact, she did me a good favor because I became more familiar with their later stuff and a little bit of the early stuff, but that's my favorite Beatles comp is the blue one. And I was like, "Man, I really dig these songs, but they're not really ones you hear on the radio too much. Like you don't really hear Old Brown Shoe on the radio." And
Right.
that's one of my favorite Beatles songs. So that's how that began. And so then being with my grandparents, I lived with them for quite a while. They raised me in a small little Texas town. I got into more music. They play a lot of more Latin American music, but my grandmother had in her collection like Tom Jones. I like Tom Jones. She had some other Beatles records. And then she had a Jimi Hendrix record, which blew my mind. I was like, "Grandma, you have a Jimi Hendrix record?" She goes, "Yeah, it's good. I bought it at a garage sale for like a quarter." I was like, "Whoa." And so that was part of it, living with them. Of course, they spoil me. And so pretty much when I would ask for a record like Kiss Destroyer or something like that, they'd like, "Okay, we'll get it on payday for you." And so, my mother was like, "No, you're not bringing those kind of records in my house, Kiss records." And I said, "But Grandma and Grandpa buy them." And she goes, "I know, and I'm going to talk to them to stop that." But so to make a long story short, I started living with them and I started growing up with them. And, pretty much when I say, "Hey, can you get me a record?" they'd come back with like something like Hotter Than Hell. And all I could think was, "Oh, if my mom saw this record cover, she would definitely take it away from me."
I have a similar situation. I was 5 or 6 years old, and we used to drive from Milwaukee to York, Pennsylvania, and
Right.
the stopover was a cousin's house in Cleveland, Ohio. I found out later he's a journalist out there and everything. And people forget, but Kiss was kind of like New Kids on the Block at the time. They were considered to be a novelty. They weren't really taken very seriously. And that's why I think they
Right.
had such a hard time getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because they weren't taken seriously. And so this guy was kind of like getting older now, going to college, just wanted to dump his Kiss records. And he gave them to me, and Mom even put them in the car. And I saw that album cover of Alive 2, and I'm like, on this day, I'm like, whoa, I mean, I'm a parent. I'd be like, oh my God, I'd be shocked that you got me that record. And I was 6 when she got me that record.
Oh wow, that is so cool. Like I'll never forget when I walked with a friend home from school. This was in Houston, Texas, and he took me to his house. And he brings out this. He goes, "You like to hear records?" I said, "Yeah, I love to hear records." He goes, "You ever heard of Kiss?" I said, at that time I was like, "No, not really." So he pulls out Kiss Alive, and I was like, "Whoa!" I looked at the cover, I looked at the booklet, and I said, "Well, they have other records." She goes, "Yeah, yeah, but I don't have those right now. I only got Kiss Alive." And we listened to that one over and over. This is before the age of video games and cell phones. I mean, people actually sat around, hung out. you're either, or with me, you either were listening to records, or you're reading comic books, or you were making, your own, whatever you were into in your hobbies while you were listening to these records. And I was just blown away by the Kiss Alive album. I was like, whoa, man, that's very energetic. That I remember, do you remember the show in the Midnight Special with
Yep.
Wolfman Jack?
Mhm.
I remember when I saw a preview that they were going to show Kiss on there, I said, I gotta watch it, but I gotta make sure my mom is crashed so I can come back up to the TV, turn it on real. And I saw them perform, and I was thinking, and I even saw them perform on Don Kirshner's rock concert. And I was like, oh man, they just kick ass every time I saw them. And I was like, I have to get their records, but could never convince my mom. She would go, I'll get you something for your birthday. And I went, is it a Kiss record? She goes, no, enjoy Hermit's Hermits. I said, okay. And I did. I'm like, okay, mom, I'll listen to Hermit's Hermits. And I like Hermit's Hermits. But it wasn't until then, what I'm getting at is that I got into, like, I would say, like, harder rock is when I went to go live with because my grandparents didn't see it as like, okay, this is nothing, Brian. He's a young guy. He's just growing up. He likes music. So, hey, he doesn't get into no kind of trouble. He does good in school. We'll get him some records. And every once in a while, I'll get Kiss Destroyer, Hotter Than Hell, a Deep Purple record or something.
How'd you get into Who?
I got into the Who. I like to share this. Thank you for letting me share this. I had a friend that we were college friends. We were going to a community college, and then we started playing in a band together for a little while. And we would go to this record store. It was really, really cool. It's not around anymore, but as you go into the back of this record store, they had an area where you could rent VHS tapes. You did a card, you filled out a card, you gave them $5. They took your money, and then they said, okay, have at it. But they also had their rules, about bringing it back. Well, we checked out this videotape of the show. I think it was either Tops of the Pops or Ready, Steady, Go.
Mhm.
And the Who were on it. And we were watching all these bands, and I was like, oh man, I dig this British stuff. And it got to the Who, and they were doing, I don't remember if it was My Generation or The Kids Are All Right. And I was captivated. I was like, these guys are doing rock and roll, and they have their own way of doing it. It's not like a Beatles. Not that I'm saying the Beatles are, but they have their own way of writing songs and making music that's just like, when you hear Pete Towns's, at least when I heard his guitar on that beginning chord of before they start saying I don't mind other guys, that just captivated me. I was like, I want to sound like that when I play guitar. And so watching that video, I kept watching it over and over because they give you a few days. And my friend was like, hey man, can we watch something else besides that Who performance? But I said, and after that, I started hearing more Who stuff. I heard Magic Bus a lot on the radio. So after that, I started gradually, I kept buying the compilation albums first of the Who, like Meaty, Beady, what is it? Meaty, Beady, Big and Bouncy, and some other Who compilation. I can't think of the other ones, but then I bought those US pressing, the 2 records.
Right.
Of the Who Sings My Generation, Magic Bus, and the other one. And JJ, that's where it started. From there on, I was like, man, the Who are my favorite band. I really dig these guys.
Well,
and they had that attitude, like, we don't care what you think of us. This is how we are.
Yeah, no, and they did. It was actually interesting. I saw the Who at Alpine Valley back in '89 on that tour. Actually, that tour is not labeled as being one of their best. It's always been kind of panned. It was the one when they used the horns and they used from '89. It was kind of panned by the critic. They did play Tommy in its entirety, and it was really cool because everybody did their solo stuff. But I was working at Alpine Valley, which is a concert theater between Chicago and Milwaukee. And
Right.
It's actually kind of funny because they're in Wisconsin, but all the bands get up there going, "Hello, Chicago," and they, it's always been a long-standing joke. But I actually got to meet the Who because the employee entrance to come into the place was in the back by the resort, Alpine Valley is this big hill. It's a deep hill, venue, and you came in the back entrance, and it had fogged up that night, and they were waiting to get limos to get them out because unless you helicoptered to Lake Geneva, the resort area, it was like a 2-lane highway that was backed up for miles after every concert. So what they would do if it was foggy and they couldn't launch helicopters, they would just entertain the band, have them hang out, and wait till they get limos in, and then get them out. And then so they were just hanging out there waiting as I walked
Oh
out.
man,
I
that's
walked out of
awesome.
work, and I
Yeah.
got to actually I got to actually meet them. My stepmom was actually busting at that concert. She was busting illegal T-shirt vendors. So the T-shirt vendors would hire these people. The people are like selling those really cheap shirts out of there. I mean, these things were cheap too. I mean, because she would confiscate them and give them to me and my brothers, and my stepbrothers, and we would like wash them once, and then they would like turn to a bib on you right away.
Yeah,
They were the
right.
worst shirts ever. But yeah, they that was a really cool experience to be able to, that's what amazed me about a year later with Stevie Ray Vaughan. I was kind of shocked that they launched this helicopter because I was like, well, that's how I met the Who. I was like, because it was too foggy to launch the helicopters, so.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was so about Stevie Ray Vaughan. That was so tragic. I always think when I remember hearing about that story, it was like I remember when I heard it, and I was like, no way, come on, that didn't really happen, did it?
Yeah.
But cool. So you said you got to see the guys, the Who, and
Yeah, they were they were just sitting there waiting, and I just walked over and I said, "Hey man, how's it going? Hi." And then we just talked for a little bit, and then I was kind of tired because I'd worked all day
right,
at the concert venue because my job was to stock the stands with all the brats, hot dogs, and then I worked like I was a food guy, and then
right, right.
so I'd been there since like 9 o'clock in the morning, and this was like 3 in the morning. So I was tired, but yeah, I said hi to them, and I got to meet Jerry
What were they
Garcia.
like? What were they
They're
like?
really
They're
nice. They're really cool, down to earth. They're just like, yeah, with their accents, like, yeah, we're just stuck here waiting. Our manager says we're gonna get out sometime. I hear the traffic's really bad out there, and I was just like, yeah, it is, guys. It's really bad. I mean, it would just back up from if the concert was sold out in one direction to
oh
Chicago, the other direction to
wow.
Milwaukee. It was only a 2-lane, and now it's expanded, but it was only a 2-lane highway, so it would just back up for miles.
Oh
No
man.
pun intended on the Who song. And then that tour was fun too because the Deadheads, Grateful Dead had just did a 3-concert stint the night before, right back to back with their tour. And so the Deadheads also hung out for the Who. So we had people dead dancing and stuff like that at the Who concert because they were hanging out to see them. So it was really fun.
Two bands I wish I could have saw. I've never seen the Who. I wanted to go see the Who, but when that story came out about that Cincinnati concert where the people rushed out panically, and my mom and my grandparents were like, no, we don't want you to go to no Who concert. That's how they thought. They were like, for your protection. I was like, I kind of argued a little bit about it, but and I was like, okay, I'm not going to get anywhere. I wish I could have saw the Grateful Dead. Now I like them, but I'm not really one of those ones where you can say, oh yeah, Edward's a deadhead. I like their music, their records, the stuff they've done, but I'm not like a real like uh big fan like some folks are, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does, yeah. And what's cool with Dead is that was like the early trading. I remember actually going on with the news groups and doing trading for Dead music, where I would say, yeah, I'll burn you 2 shows if you send me 2 shows. And then if somebody didn't
Ooh,
honor the trade, you would then bash them on the news group and say, don't do. I mean, I'm just throwing out, don't do trades with Proghat anymore. He stiffed me on. I sent him a bunch of concerts and he stiffed, and then you would be blacklisted and people wouldn't do it with you. It was kind of cool.
that is really cool to be in those. Whenever I started seeing those trade groups, I kind of remember there was one real generic looking page, and it was for Bob Dylan's shows, but there was no more activity on there. Like you could tell, like that, whoa, people haven't been here in a while. So I didn't get into one, but I was fortunate that I had a good friend that worked in a record store, and I used to hang out with him in his at his apartment. And I looked at one of his shelves, and I go, "What are all those cassettes of?" He goes, "I pretty much have a lot of cassettes of the Grateful Dead concerts on there. And sometimes when he gets a chance, he says, I'll make a CD." I was like, wow, that's a lot of shows. And he was like, if I get a chance, I'll make you one. He made me one of a show. I don't know where it is right now, but it's a really, really good show. They sound great. And but so every once in a while, he throw me like how we say here, he throw me a free bones and give me some free shows. Like he gave me some Tom Waits live at ACL shows and some Bob Dylan shows. And I call them Italian imports because when I worked in a record store for a little while, you didn't say the word bootlegs. You just said, "Oh, you mean the Italian imports? Let me show you where they are."
It was actually a funny story. I was a naive young boy from Milwaukee when I went to Brooklyn, New York to go to film school. And I
Right.
was walking with this girl I was dating in the village. And we're walking down, and this guy has this little boombox. And I look over and I'm like, I'd heard about bootlegs. I'd heard about them. And I yell out really loud and I go, "Oh my God, he's got bootlegs." And the guy's like, "They're not bootlegs. They are live recordings. Please get that right, sir." I'm like, well, I was just being the naive young guy from the small town, be like, "Oh my God, he's got them," you know. There's no
I
internet.
know the manager of the store pulled me to the side and he said, "Ed, they are Italian imports." And then he went into this long spiel. You never know, we might have somebody undercover and you say that word, then this whole place gets shut down. And I was like, oh, okay, and I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they are bootlegs, but anyway, okay, I'll respect. I want to keep my little job because it's feeding my collection. But yeah, we had some of those, and like I said, I had this friend. I don't know. We kind of separated, but he gave me a bunch. He even gave me a few Who shows, a few Miles Davis shows, and bunches of Neil Young. He was a big fan of Neil Young. He gave me like these really uh like 8 disc of Neil Young shows, especially like when he would do solo, or there was this one, and you might have heard of this title. It's called Neil Young Rock and Roll Cowboy Solo,
Yeah.
and it's just all these solo performances on guitar of Neil Young, and it's like 8 disc. I still have it. I need to burn it into something so I can save it because I noticed the disc are kind of getting a little bit, that look where they look a little like, I don't know how to describe it, like kind of goldish, like they're
Yeah.
what is that called,
Disc rot.
JJ?
Disc
Okay,
rot.
okay. So I want to save them, but I didn't. When I do it, I want to throw them away or something.
Yeah, just usually if you can try to catch them early enough, you just extract them to your hard drive, and then you can reburn it onto something else, so then you have them.
Yes.
That's the problem with my collection right now. For me, I'm gonna go on a little
Go
tangent
ahead. Go
here
ahead. Go ahead.
with my collection is that um, I have a 17-year-old. I got moved out of my office upstairs. I had a huge physical media collection that took up rooms, and both for movies, for music, for everything. And I digitally transferred everything. I mean, I got an 8 terabyte server behind me with all my movies on it.
Oh wow.
And Yeah, because I had so much, but I just got to a point where I was like buried in this stuff, and I didn't know there was vinyl collecting. So that's why sometimes I'm like, yeah, I have that one. That's like with Mo Better Blues. I'm like, I have that one, but it's on digital. I transferred the CD and then probably sold the CD, traded it off to somebody else, and now I have it on. I can listen to it anytime. But it makes it really hard when you're trying to do a video in the vinyl community and like show this. It's like, I did that one of Trevor's videos where that Howard Stern I have back there. I had it ordered, so I actually showed up a picture. I was like, "Here's the picture of what I have," you know. Yeah, but yeah,
I, I'm in this. I'm in the same way. I have one of those old school over here, an internal, no, excuse me, external hard drive. It's one of those Buffalo ones. And a guy told me, hey, Ed, since you have a lot of music, you might want to get you one of those so you can back it up and save it. And so I have like a lot of stuff that I want to make again. Like I have like some rare McCartney and Wings stuff and some different alternate versions of the Dark Side of the Moon and things like that. And that's like, I'll get around to it because I don't have I have like what I call the Edward budget type of equipment. Like, I have a laptop, it's very limited. It's just things that I can afford to hear my collection. Um, every once in a while upgrade. But you know, I've always been like, I'll give an example. Like when I started getting into Who records, and I started buying the imports, and when I found out there were import versions of those records and Beatle ones, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, that makes sense because they're from England. I'd rather have the British version of Revolver because they put the songs in the correct order, that really came out, not
Right.
like the US. And they put more songs. So yeah, definitely I'll go there. And so at that time I had one stereo with one speaker, and I said, hey, that's the way I'm going to roll. I'm not, I can't afford a lot of stuff. So that's how I listened to a lot of my early records, was that one little turntable with the one speaker, and I was a happy camper. I just want to hear the record.
Yeah, I know what you mean. My first record player had was an 8 track and it had everything on it. And I don't think we were as audiophile back then either that people are now,
Yes,
I don't think they were as crazy with that stuff as they are now. I mean, it goes a little, to me, it goes a little overboard sometimes, like what people are paying for jazz records, so they're paying for some of this stuff. And, the best answer I've heard is people are willing to pay for it, so they do it. And that's kind of what reason I got into KTEL collecting again, is KTEL was part of my nostalgia. I mean, it was $7.99. I didn't have a big budget either. I didn't. $7.99 can get me 20 songs versus buy the one album by the one guy, and I didn't even know the other songs on it, and which one just financially fed the budget at that time. So
exactly. If you can do it, if you can go that way, good. But I'd like to put my money. Let's just say, if I won't pay $800 for a Blue Note. I'd rather put that towards something else, like 400 somewhere else, and then 400 maybe on some other records, but not too much. But if you can buy that kind of thing, but here's the deal though. Here's what my take on that is. Okay, you do realize that when you buy a record like that for $800, in my opinion, once you drop that guy, guess what? That's $800 that gets to go. And I have a story that I bought a really rare record. I didn't pay a lot for it, but I did a bad mistake and just reached over here, grabbed it. And when I did that record, it was a prog band called Coliseum. And that record flew out, went to the ground. That was it. And I was like,
sorry.
and I said, to teach me a lesson about sticking to your budget for myself, and being careful about how much you spend, I kept the album cover to remind me, hey, you remember this? Think about it before you think you're going to go get you $100 or $200 record. If you can do that, that's great. But I think about that, and I was thinking, once they hit the ground, guess what? The show's over.
Yeah, and the other thing too with bootlegs as well, and people spend all this money on bootlegs. Like I talked about in Rachel's show. I saw Almost Famous bootleg, the soundtrack for. They wanted $100 for it, and I just found out when I was Amazon yesterday that they're releasing the Almost Famous soundtrack. On July 8th, my birthday actually. They're releasing it that day. So I'm like, I'm glad I didn't buy that bootleg, because that's what happens too when you buy bootleg. You dump all this money and then they release it, and you're like, oh
Yes.
man, it could be
Yes.
for movies, it could be for vinyl, it could be for anything, and then they reissue it, and then you're mad.
Right. Right. I'll never forget when there was a one period of my life, and I'm still am a big Yes fan, but I went to a record show here in Texas, and when I was in the at the record show, I was like a kid in a candy store, like, wow, look at all these vintage records. And then I went by this one table, and this guy had these black and white cover, but they were really nice art, and they were Yes shows, Yes concerts. And I was like, how much? And I didn't know any better. And I was thinking, 10 or $20. And he goes, oh, that show has become very rare. That's a $300 record. I was like, oh, okay, not interested. But like you said, as soon as you buy one of those, they're going to put it official release. I mean, that's what they're doing with some of the Yes stuff. That's what they're doing with that Bob Dylan bootleg series. Most of those things I already had as bootlegs, but then they made it official. And I was thinking, oh, I could have waited a little while.
Exactly. I remember going to record shows. I mean, actually going back to it in 2 weeks with you probably know Slambo. I'm going to go to a record show with him in a couple of weeks because
Yes.
he's local for me here. And I remember in the late '90s, I was going to these, they called them record shows or whatever you want to call them, CD stores, and it was really funny because I remember on my ticket it said um, uh, specialized music search service. And I'm thinking, what are they? These guys, I mean, not being in IT and stuff, I was thinking, oh, these guys have their inventories on spreadsheets or something and let them know so you know what vendor to go to. No, it was basically like this guy sat up on a stage with a microphone and you walk up to me, I'm looking for somebody with Proghat. He'd be like, anybody got any Proghat? Raise your hand,
Yeah.
vendor, if you got it. And he goes, all right, it's over there. They have it. Go over there. That was the secret service, search service that they had. Yeah, those, but that was actually really cool because that was after like, what bootlegs am I after or whatever I'm to be after, and they were charging a ton of money for those things.
Yes. And that's what they do here in Texas. Like when you go to one of the record shows, the one that kind of the first time I ever heard about like promos and stuff was when somebody got on a microphone. Okay, any dealers out there have Beatles Yellow Submarine, but the buyer's looking for a promo copy of it, a promo copy. And I was thinking, promo? What is that? And then lo and behold, I discovered the word of promo, and I was thinking, wow. I mean, I've heard different stories about promo records. I have a really good friend that works at a record store here in Austin called Waterloo Records. I've known him since high school. I've always bought records and trusted his opinion. And he started telling me about the story about promos. And what I always was wondering, but is it the just to collect it, or do they have a different mix? Do they sound better? That's that's what I think of when I see a promo record. That's the first thing I think, oh, it must sound better, but I don't think that's necessarily the case.
No, I've actually seen them too, where I found one was a Phil Collins promo CD.
Right.
And it was actually designed, I saw this in the late '90s. It was designed so that you could have an interview with Phil. That's what it was designed to do. So it'd be like, it would have these are the questions, and it had music on there too, but then it would have him like doing a paragraph so you could get on your show and say, like, hey, Phil, what do you think of your new record coming out, Almost Paradise? And then you could just edit it in the studio so that it sounded like you were interviewing him. And that it was a promo record that way for
Oh,
the radio station.
see, I
So
didn't know that.
yeah.
That's what they do. That's why I'd always go, hey, man, how did they get it? Because there was one of Pete Townsend, and they had some of the songs, and I was thinking, how did they do that? How did they get set up an interview with Pete Townsend and ask him all these questions? I never thought about like you could get one and go like I could act like I'm with Pete Townsend and go, hey Pete, what do you think about your album coming out? Who are you? And then his voice would come in. I didn't think about that, but that's interesting.
Yeah, speaking of Phil, we actually had a funny story here one time back during the Genesis tour in the '90s. Daryl
Right.
Sturmer, his guitarist, is from New Berlin, Wisconsin, over here,
Oh
and
wow.
his daughter Blab. He wanted to have Phil and Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks over for a barbecue, and his daughter, who was 12, excited Blab to the press, and so the press were like all over his New Berlin home. And he's just trying to have like a cat, like you and I would have in our backyard with like your coworkers. He's just trying to
Yeah.
have a barbecue with them, and
Right. If I did then they're like, what? Proghat has Pete Townsend over there, and the next thing you know, my whole back.
exactly.
Oh
So
man,
then
that's
you go
that's
from the
neat.
Who to jazz. You go from the Who to jazz. How did the jazz love start? I know you're really into jazz. I've been watching your stuff.
Oh wow. The jazz. Okay. Before my daughter was born and my wife hadn't gave birth to her yet, uh, and then she was born, like in her that's how I pinpoint it in a timeline for myself. I was working at this record store and I was like, hey man, one thing scratched off the bucket list. I always wanted to work in a record store, and the guy hired me because he recognized when I was a customer the knowledge I had. And so it was a quick little interview with them, quick little resume thing. And then I was hired like within 2 days. But anyway, I was working there one day, and one of the guys that was working in there, he was playing some jazz music. And I was like, man, this stuff really swings. The drumming kind of reminds me of Keith Moon, the chops. And he goes, "Oh, you never heard of Art Blakey?" I said, "No, I never have. Who is he?" He's like, "Dude, let me tell you, we're listening to Art Blakey live at some concert place, and it was an official release too." And he was like, "You never heard of Blue Note?" I said, "No, what's Blue Note?" He's like, "It's a jazz label. There's Blue Note, there's Riverside," and he starts telling me, well, and then he starts going, "There's a lot of great jazz musicians. You never heard of John Coltrane?" Or I said, "No." I mean, I might have heard their music in a movie, but didn't know who it was. And I said, "But I do know Miles Davis. I hear his name a lot." And he goes, "Well, let me introduce you to the world of Blue Note." And he says, "You want to start?" His opinion was, the CD that I'm playing, go get that one and volume two. There was a volume one and a volume two, which I never understood that, because I was thinking, well, if they were there, why didn't they just make it a one whole record or make it a double album? But apparently, I guess jazz musicians played one night, and then the next night was volume two, the
Right.
second night. And so I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So I went over to our blues section when I was working there, and I was like, oh, OMG, look at all this great stuff. And I said, Blue Note, all this like Ornette Coleman, uh, some Miles Davis, there's Thelonious Monk. And it was just like, for me, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. So hearing him play that, having conversations with him, that's when I started getting into jazz, to the Blue Note stuff and other labels. I can't think of them. I want to say that another label that I really did like was one called Pacific Jazz Music Record Label, which I think was kind of like a low end budget one. And then there was Bethlehem Jazz Records or something like that.
Right.
And so I started getting it, and gradually I was like, man, where have I been? And so I was kept listening to jazz and jazz. And the record that got me into more of the spiritual or the electric jazz is when I actually heard these two records, and I bought them as blind buys. I was like, I'm going to get them. Was Love Supreme, John Coltrane, and his other one, Ascension, and Bitches Brew. I said, I like these covers. I'm just going to buy them. I'm not going to go listen to them on YouTube. I'm just going to buy them. And then that's how, out of being one of those blind buyers, that's how I got into more of the electric spiritual jazz, which stuff that I still really enjoy listening to. But that's how I got into jazz music. And then I didn't read like I should have about these records, but when I would listen to a documentary, and I was blown away when people were like, oh, Bitches Brew, that's his worst record. I was like, what? I couldn't comprehend that. And I was thinking, well, because there's these jazz elitists like, hey man, really what you've done is you're ruining jazz. That's not really school jazz. You got away from the structure. And I was thinking to myself, no, because if you were to say that, then you're saying the Beatles got away from structure, or the Who got away from structure. No, they just started to farm out into other types of things that could be introduced into the music, or a chord change or whatever it is. And so that's how I like spiritual jazz. A lot of guys in the VC like to make fun of me. They'll say, "Oh man, if you give that record to Proghat, he'd love that."
Well, yeah, and for me, and I like the fact, and it's impressed this and you talk, is that you like what you like, because that was my biggest thing. And when you're a teenager, you're pulled into so many different directions. And I went to 9 different grade schools in my
Right.
moving around a lot. But every grade school I went to, I moved to the new group. So it was Kiss here, or it was metal here, then it was rap here at one point. I mean, I was in the Run DMC, Picture Me the King go on and everything, and I was into that. Then I
Right.
was into, New Order and Depeche Mode at another school, and then another one. My favorite comment I was ever told in my life that I still baffles me, like, "You like pop music?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, how can you like pop music? You guys like classic rock, like the Eagles. I'm like, well, the Eagles were pop at one time. If you go look at the charts, they were up there. I mean, so you can't say
Exactly.
that, you can't say that about that anyways. But what's cool is that now we're adults. You can actually like what you like, and you have that confidence to be able to say, hey, I like what I like, but it's influenced me in everything that they listen to. Like if you look at my collection, I mean, I have rap, I have rock, I have all these different stuff and jazz and everything. And you're gonna laugh, but how I got into jazz was actually my mom was huge into Kenny G. And even a funnier story in that one is I said, Mom, there's this guy Kenny G. You gotta check him out. And he was new at the time. He wasn't even near at what he was at that time. And my mom thought it was one of my rap records. She really did. She thought it was my rap
What?
because of the name Kenny G. She thought it was like all
Oh,
my
okay, I
rap
get
stuff
it.
that I was listening to. She's like, no, I don't want to hear that. And then she's like, then she walked in my room and said, what are you playing? I go, that's Kenny G. She's like, oh, I like this. And so we kind of made another common ground to go to a concert together. And I saw Stanley Jordan. Have you heard of him?
Oh,
I
yes.
saw him open for Kenny G. And that was to me even better than Kenny G because that technique he did with the hammer,
Yes.
where he hammers on it, he plays Stairway
Yes.
or Eleanor Rigby. Oh my God, I was blown away by that. And then I got up to New York and everybody was into the Blue Note. See, at that time, with the vinyl was not that big. It was Blue Note CDs, and they actually at Tower Records. I remember they had their own section, so and it was soundproofed, so that the rock and roll that was playing in all the other places, you went in this jazz room, and then you close the door, and it was all jazz music with jazz enthusiasts and everything, in there. That's got me into jazz as well. But that's why I expanded my horizons to more, John Coltrane and realized what jazz is really more about than just the fusion and everything else that was out there.
JJ, that is really, really cool. I mean, Kenny G, I like Kenny G. I do. I mean, I don't have a lot of his music. I'm trying to think of what I do have, but when I first heard that hit on the radio that he had such much success, Songbird,
Yeah.
I was like, man, this guy's got a really good tone, and you can hear it and feel it through this tune. You know, you it's like one of those tunes where like I really don't want it to end. I want him to keep going with it.
Oh yeah,
And
and his concerts were amazing too because what he was known for was he had a portable mic hooked into his sax, and he would go out in the audience and play. My mom and them, they ate it up. He'd out there, he would go right out in the audience and play. It was unbelievable. It was great stuff. You know,
oh, cool, cool.
yeah.
That's really, really, really cool. Everyone has a different door of how they get into jazz. Some like jazz, but then I have run into some that don't like the spiritual jazz. It always gets me when they say I don't get it, and I'm thinking, well, how did you get the blue note jazz? How did you get that?
Right.
I don't know.
Well,
That
I
might
was
sound a
asking
little
around too today.
bit.
We like the Marsalis brothers, and I'm like, no, that I only like jazz. Like anything after this date is crap. I've been told that already. Anything. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, I met a guy who worked with me, and he also contributed to me more spiritual jazz because he would make CDRs, but he would make really cool artwork for them. And he would go, here, Ed, I made you some. And he introduced me to Albert Ayler and uh, Alice Coltrane, who I love. I love Alice Coltrane and other spirit of Pharoah Sanders. But we were talking one day because we used to have a Tower Records here, and this is my story about I'm just only seeing what's in front of me, kind of thing. And I would tell me, yeah, I used to go to Tower Records a lot. I used to love the classic rock imports. They would have CDs, LPs, and I would just look on this one level. He goes, you never did go upstairs? I said, upstairs? No, there wasn't an upstairs. He says, Edward, there was an upstairs at top because we live in Austin. There was an upstairs. You didn't see that elevator? I said, I saw the two doors, but when I was in there, I never saw them really open up and people getting on. He goes, dude, there was a second level. If you would have went up there, you would have been in jazz heaven. They have a room, like you're saying, it's closed off. And that's where that's where I got all these jazz titles that I'm making you copies of. I went, OMG, you mean there was something above my and it was the jazz me funny because I'm kind of laughing about it, thinking about it. I'm thinking I got into spiritual jazz and it's supposed to take you to this higher place. Here I am right here. The higher place was up here all the time with that record store. I didn't know it was that big. He goes, dude, they had a second level and it was all jazz. I was like, OMG, when he told me that. I never went upstairs.
My roommate was really up. My roommate's the one that told me about upstairs. That my roommate was a heavy metal guy. He was into King Diamond,
Right,
thrash, death metal. But he came to the school. I came there for film, and he was there for music. And they had a jazz clinic, and he was really wanting to get into jazz and learn more. He was playing the bass, but he wanted to get more into the upright bass and play more jazz and
right,
become
right.
even, yeah, he's the one that told me. He was like, yeah, I hate to say this, JJ, but I need to get some stuff for my paper. And he was going upstairs to the jazz center.
And the whole time we had one, and I was always looking forward, like Badfinger, Beatles, classic rock. I never and they did have a classical music section that I like to look at too, because I do like classical music. But I remember seeing those doors, but when I was in there, I was thinking, oh, there's those doors, but I never actually saw them open up and people getting them going to the second floor to the jazz section.
And actually, jazz helped out Spike Lee's career a lot. I don't know if you know this or not as a fun fact, but his dad was a jazz musician named Bill Lee.
Oh,
And
really?
his dad, he uses, I mean, it's in Spike Lee's guerrilla filmmaking books. He would say, use wherever you can. So he would joke saying, if you have a mom that can cook, there's your catering for your film because you're on a low budget. And he said, well, he was lucky because his dad was a jazz artist. And so he would have his dad actually compose using jazz music. She's Got to Have It and Parts to Do the Right Thing. And then he later branched out to Terrence Blanchard. But in the beginning, he started out with his dad. And that's how and that's why it was so important to him when Mo Better Blues came out that he wanted a name the movie Love Supreme. That didn't happen because the estate fought back, but he did get the montage in there. But the only rule was that it couldn't be on the soundtrack. So
Oh,
there's a
okay.
whole montage where they play Love Supreme in the end of that movie from start to finish, and the whole montage sequence. They have it's like the movie's transitioning, and yeah, it's all done to Love Supreme by John
Oh,
Coltrane.
wow.
I remember hearing that too, and that's when I first heard it, and I was like, "What is this?" And I had the soundtrack. I'm like, "It's not on here," and I'm like, "Where is this?" I'm like, and then my roommate was the one who said, "That's John Coltrane. That's classic, John Coltrane." I'm like, "Oh," and then as I ran ahead to go get that CD right away, Love Supreme, and had to have it, and I was like, "This is awesome."
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's my favorite jazz album of all time. Love Supreme. Love it. Love it. You
Done in
said a
one take.
name. What was that?
It was done in one take.
I know. And it was, if I remember right, the documentary said that it was done and recorded in his house.
Yeah.
And I thought that blew me away. I was like, what? Even jazz musicians made records in their homes? I thought they went down to a studio and say, hey, I'm ready to record something. But that blew me away that he did that. You said a name that I also like, that musician, Terrence.
Blanchard.
Yeah, I dig that guy.
He
Good
scored a
music.
lot of Spike Lee stuff. He scored Malcolm X, and yeah, he kind of took over. I believe that Bill Lee had some like drug problems or something like that, so Spike Lee couldn't rely on him as much. So then he branched out to reach out to Terrence and then start scoring his films.
That is a good guy to go to. I can see that. I can see that magic happening. I have a couple of his stuff from the guy that I was telling you that made me CDRs, but he would also make the real nice artwork for him. Um, he made me a couple of his CDs. Good stuff. I need to look at them, make sure they're not doing the CD rot thing too. I need to save them. It's great stuff.